You don't need to learn how to awaken. You just need to remember. Because the life you are living might just be a memory. And what you're feeling may not be the first time. Sometimes it's not that you're on the wrong path. It's that you're stepping out of a dream others still believe is real. You're not broken. You're not crazy. You're not lost. You're simply opening your eyes while the world is still asleep. You might not remember it clearly, but this has happened before. Not in this life, but somewhere beyond time, deeper than space, more delicate than even your dreams. You've seen someone and knew. You have met them before, even if your mind says otherwise. You've walked into a place you've never been and felt like you were home, though no memory ties you to it. You've heard a song for the very first time. But every note, every rhythm, every melody felt like a heartbreak long-lived, as if you had loved, lost, and lived an entire lifetime in that music. These things don't follow logic, and you don't need to explain them, because they are soul memories, rising without invitation, without schedule, without anyone leading you. They rise, simply because the time has come. Maybe you've dreamed of flying, not like in ordinary dreams, but as if your body had truly escaped gravity, and you remembered exactly how to move it, effortlessly, freely, as though you'd done it 1,000 times before. And then you woke up with a longing you couldn't name. That wasn't fantasy. That was a layer of consciousness long hidden beneath history, education, religion, language, layers that made you forget. You are not just human. You are aware that once drifted among the stars. You are light that chose to experience darkness, so it could remember itself again. And today, in this very moment as you hear these words, you're beginning to remember. Before you had a name, you already existed. Not as a persona, not as a personality, not as someone trying to become something, but as a pure stream of consciousness. Still, silent, fully aware of life without needing to question it. You didn't need to be called, didn't need to be validated, didn't need to be defined, because you knew who you were, not through words, but through frequency. That's the state you carried with you into this world. But slowly, bit by bit, you were taught how to forget it. You learned to distinguish me from others. You learned to label emotions, what was allowed and what was forbidden. You learned to silence your intuition when it spoke. You learned to live, to please others. And in doing so, you forgot how to simply be with yourself. It all began with something so simple. You were given a name, and from that name, everything else followed. The good child, the smart one, the talented one, the successful one, lovable when quiet, worthy when achieving, valuable when making someone proud. No one is to blame for this journey. The world is merely repeating a cycle of forgetting that has lasted for generations. But deep within you, that original truth has never been lost. It's simply been waiting for the right moment to return. Not with noise, not with drama, but with a single breath. Deep, slow, and whole, when you no longer try to become anyone, and you are no longer afraid to be yourself. That is when your original awareness returns, not as an idea, but as a remembering. You didn't begin this journey today, not because of this video, not because of a recent turning point. You began a long time ago. In those moments you felt different without knowing why. In those recurring dreams with strange symbols, your soul whispered, "I remember." You tried to live normally. You blended in. so well that no one suspected something within you was awakening. You achieved success, but still felt something missing. You were loved, but still felt alone. You were recognized, but still didn't know who you truly were. No one saw. Those nights you sat in silence, staring at a dark ceiling, feeling as though you stood before an invisible door. No handle, no nameplate, just a deep pull inside whispering, "I need to walk through." But walk through to where? Toward what? And become who? You didn't know, and you didn't need to know. Because in that moment, you stopped living by logic. You began moving to a wordless rhythm from a realm you once belonged to. You weren't chasing the light. You were moving toward something inside that softly whispered, "We've been here before." The journey you are on now isn't new. It's a returning cycle. But this time, you are no longer asleep as it unfolds. And that's why you're here. Not to begin, but to continue something sacred that was never finished. Not with grand gestures, but with an awakening, quiet, deep, and profoundly still. Everything was flowing as usual. You woke up on time. You drank your coffee out of habit. You checked your phone. You replied to emails, smiled politely, and got your work done. Nothing was wrong, but nothing felt real anymore. At some point, you don't know exactly when, things began to quietly break apart. No major event, no explosion, just something inside you that no longer wanted to pretend. You were in the middle of a conversation and realized you weren't listening. You nodded, but your mind was blank. You smiled, but deep in your chest was an unnamed emptiness. And then you stopped, not because you wanted to rebel, but because you simply couldn't act anymore. You started to notice the scripts around you, the recycled phrases, the lifeless glances, the social gatherings where no one was truly present, the compliments, the teachings, the love, all without real frequency. This world felt like a stage that had been running too long, and you were the first to wake up in the middle of the play. At first, you didn't know what to do. You just knew something felt wrong. Wrong for you. Wrong in feeling. Wrong in the way something deep inside you had started to stir. You looked around and saw everyone else was still living by the script, and only you were starting to see behind the curtain. That's when the first crack appeared. No one could see it on your face, but inside, the entire old world had started to break open. Once the crack appears, it doesn't stop. You begin to notice things you'd never paid attention to before, or things you had noticed but always ignored. You sit in a meeting room and suddenly wonder, what are all these people chasing? You look in the mirror each morning and hear a voice echo, "Who am I?" You scroll through social media and realize you're contributing to a nameless performance. At first, those questions come like strange winds, gentle, fleeting, but soon they start returning, more persistent and deeper. Why do I keep feeling like I don't belong? Why do I do all the right things, yet still feel empty? Why do I have everything others seem to want, yet still feel unhappy? You try to share these questions with others, and they tell you, don't overthink it. Everyone feels that way. That's just life. But you can't pretend anymore. You can't go back to how it was. Because once awareness opens, you can't force it shut. You can't unsee. You can't unfeel. You can't unhear that something inside is waking up beat by beat. You begin to realize the answers aren't in what you were taught, not in the textbooks, not in rigid doctrines, not in the promise of someday things will get better. The answer might not be anywhere at all. It might only be born through your honest relationship with the question itself. And the most important question is this: if I'm not everything others expect me to be, then who am I? The question has been planted, and you can no longer pretend you didn't hear it. You look at the world and see it still spinning. People are still smiling, still working, still talking about the weather, TV shows, gas prices, deadlines. But to you, everything suddenly feels heartbreakingly foreign. You're still here, but you no longer belong. You walk through the streets, through the crowds, through family, friends, lovers, and feel like a visitor from another planet, observing a civilization that no longer speaks your language. No one knows what you're going through, because there are no words that capture it. You can't name the feeling, both empty and profound, both aching for something that has never even happened in this lifetime. You try to return to your old rhythm, to do the things that once brought you joy, but they no longer reach you. You try meeting new people, joining familiar conversations, but it all feels like it's happening behind a fogged glass, and you begin to accept you are drifting into a space where no one can guide you. You no longer belong to the crowd, but you don't yet belong anywhere else either. And in that very lostness, a door begins to open. Not outside, but within. Because when there is no one left to ask, you begin to listen to yourself. When there is nothing left to hold on to, you begin to stand in pure presence. And right there, loneliness becomes sacred. When everything familiar begins to break apart, what remains is not the truth, not immediately. What remains is the void. No more reference points, no self to lean on, no roles left to play. You stand in a nameless desert where no one leads, no map exists, and there isn't even a destination. No one tells you this. When you begin to awaken, you'll have to pass through a layer, thin but utterly real, the layer of dissolution. Everything you once believed to be you starts to melt. Every role, every label, every accomplishment, every fear you clung to like part of your body. You no longer know who you are, and that both terrifies you and strangely sets something softly free. You move through each day as if walking inside a dream. But this dream has no main character, only presence, watching everything unfold. You begin to see you are not the voice inside your head. You are the one who listens. You are not the thoughts that come and go. You are the space in which all thoughts are born and dissolved. No one can see this from the outside, but inside you, the entire structure of the self is collapsing silently, like snow falling in the dark. This is not a physical death. It is a spiritual death. A death with no funeral, no name, no one to understand it, but you. And if you go deep enough, you'll discover emptiness is not the end. It is the stillness before something real begins to bloom. No one prepares you for this. No book describes it quite right. No one warns you what it feels like. Because only those who've walked through it can truly understand. The night of the soul is not just a period of sadness. It's not depression. It's not ordinary confusion. It is deeper, wider, quieter, and more terrifying than any pain you've ever known. You no longer are anyone. You no longer feel real. Everything you once knew, believed in, or loved becomes just flickering images you no longer connect to. You see no light, no meaning, no motivation to try. You don't even want to awaken anymore. You just want silence. A silence so profound that even the voices inside go quiet. And what remains is a strange stillness, where time no longer moves, and you're not even sure you exist. You might cry, but not out of pain, out of feeling completely invisible to everything. This is not the end. It is the moment before a soul is truly reborn. In that absolute darkness, every remaining shell is worn away. Every effort to cling to old identities becomes meaningless. And then one day, without knowing why, you hear the faintest sound. Not from the outside, but from deep within. A small rhythm of life, beginning again. It is not a brilliant light. It is the first quiet flame, still glowing, after the storm has passed. You don't know why, but one very quiet morning, something small within you begins to move. It's not excitement. It's not motivation. It's not a dazzling light like in the movies. It's just a gentle knowing that you're still here, that you're still breathing, that something inside you never left. And from that deep, still place, intuition begins to speak. Not in words, not in logic, but in a faint frequency, like distant waves crashing on a faraway shore. Yet somehow you know that sound is calling you. Intuition doesn't give you answers. It doesn't hand you a road map. It doesn't say this is the right path. It simply whispers, try stepping that way. Pause here. Listen. Trust. Nothing is certain. And yet, strangely, you feel safer than ever. Intuition doesn't speak loudly because it knows you've learned how to hear silence. Here, you don't need to understand. You just stay with what you feel. No pushing, no controlling, no striving. You begin to take your first steps. Not because you should do something, but because something within you has finally become still enough to lead. And just like that, after everything, life begins to return. Not with noise, not with fanfare, but as a single, quiet warmth crossing through the door you've opened from the inside. You begin to live differently. No one notices right away. But you know, something has shifted. You no longer need a reason to choose a path. You choose because you know. Not the kind of knowing written in books. Not knowledge learned from others. But a kind of knowing that cannot be explained, yet makes you feel as steady as a mountain, even when no one agrees. You start moving to a different rhythm. No longer pulled by schedules, deadlines, or expectations. No longer reacting from anxiety, fear, or pressure. You respond through listening. Others may ask, why did you quit that job? Aren't you worried about the future? Why don't you choose something more secure? And you can't explain it, because you're not deciding based on logic. You're being guided by an inner current, one that had been buried beneath layers of fear, now finding its way back into the light. Sometimes you don't know why you're where you are. But then, the right thing shows up. The right person appears. The door opens. Just as you stop trying to force the wrong one, you begin to feel like speaking to you. Through synchronicities, through repeating numbers, through a book falling open to the exact page you needed, through a stranger's words, as if they were delivering a message from somewhere deeper. You no longer search for the meaning of life. You become life itself. Give meaning with every step you take. When you begin to live by intuition, something strange happens. You stop seeking knowledge the way you used to. You start remembering. You read a passage in a book, and it doesn't feel new. You hear a lecture about energy, and something deep inside you nods in silent agreement. You don't know why you understand, but you do. No explanation is needed. No proof is required. This isn't the first time you've encountered concepts like the law of vibration, energy fields, sacred symbols, hermeticism, macabre, thoth, akasha, the law of one. They don't arrive as new information. They return like memories, long covered in dust. You were once a keeper of this wisdom. You once carried it in your blood. You once taught, not through words, but through the frequency of your living presence. And now, you are reactivating your own soul's records. No need to enroll in anything. No need to follow anyone. Just be still with what feels true, without needing to prove it. You begin to see all religions speak of the same essence. All mystical traditions revolve around one core. All ancient symbols are mirrors reflecting what you already are. No one gives you the truth. They only serve as reminders, because truth doesn't come from outside. It rises from within when you're ready. You don't need to be afraid anymore. You don't need to hide what you know without knowing how. Because now you understand. You are not crazy. You are simply waking up in an age where sleep has lasted far too long, when you've lived long enough from intuition, when ancient symbols no longer feel foreign, when you stop searching. What remains? You become frequency, not a persona, not a spiritual person, not someone who needs to be understood, but a presence so deeply aware, felt awe and real, those words become unnecessary. You enter a room and say nothing, but people feel something shift in the field around you. Not a blinding light, not a high vibration aura, but a stillness profoundly deep, a quiet, unmistakably real, a gaze that no longer labels the world. You no longer want to explain who you are. You simply want to live and allow your energy to speak for itself. You sit in stillness, and life still flows to you. No chasing, no competing, no proving, because you, yourself, have become the living answer. Some people will be drawn to you. They won't know why. They won't have words for it, but they'll feel calmer in your presence. They'll hear your voice and feel their hearts soften. They'll look into your eyes and remember something they once knew and forgot. You don't need to convince anyone of what you know. You only need to embody the truth you've chosen to believe. You're not a preacher. You're a frequency, steady, quiet, real, moving through every role, beyond all masks. You're no longer afraid of the obvious things. Not afraid of failure, not afraid of what people think, not afraid of getting lost. But then you realize there's still a deeper layer of fear, hidden beneath it all. It's a subtle fear, programmed long ago. If I live my truth, I'll be abandoned. If I don't obey, I'll be punished. If I'm not like everyone else, I won't be safe. That fear isn't yours. It comes from an invisible system you've lived in for so long that you forgot it was ever optional. We call it society, standards, norms, but its true nature is a frequency matrix. The matrix doesn't run on weapons, it runs on frequencies of anxiety, division, comparison, and lack. You were taught to push, to achieve, to become, to do more, faster, and like everyone else. And if you don't follow that path, you will fail, be excluded, be labeled weird, be considered dangerous. The matrix doesn't need you to suffer. It just needs you to doubt yourself, to keep believing you're not enough, to keep chasing solutions outside of yourself. And then, when you begin to slow down, to listen, to trust your intuition, to let go of the idea of success, the matrix reacts. It sends you familiar voices. Don't stop. You have to do something. You can't live like this forever. Who do you think you are to live this way? But this time, you hear clearly, those voices aren't yours. They are echoes of a system that's used to pull the strings. And for the first time, you no longer react. You don't need to fight the matrix. You don't need to expose it. You don't need to convince anyone that it's manipulating you. You simply need to withdraw your energy from it. Every time you choose not to react, you cut a cord. Every time you choose not to obey out of fear, you unplug the power feeding the control system. Liberation doesn't come from loud rebellion. It comes from intentional stillness. You don't post to protest. You don't argue about right and wrong. You simply no longer believe in the script. You see an ad and feel no pull. You hear a comment and it passes through you like wind. You witness others in chaos, but your breath remains steady and deep. You no longer strive to reach freedom, because now you understand. Freedom is not a destination. Freedom is a state you choose to live in. Right here, right now. You no longer ask, what should I do? Instead, you ask, is this choice coming from love or fear? If I wasn't worried about what others think, what would I do differently? And every time you choose from love, from truth, from inner stillness, you shake the foundation of the old frequency. No need to convert anyone. No need to win the debate. Just stay loyal to the vibration of your truth. And then you realize no one is holding you back. No one is tying you down. The door was never locked. You just didn't believe you could walk out. Now you know. You are walking out. Not with your feet, but through the new frequency. You choose to hold in every breath. There's nothing left to achieve, nothing to dismantle, nothing that needs to be fixed. Only one thing remains. Simple, yet infinitely deep. You stay. Stay in presence. Stay in the breath. Stay in each step. Not to get anywhere, but simply to be. It's not about letting go of everything. It's about letting go of the need for anything to be different. You no longer pray for a different life. You simply show up fully to the life that is. And in that space, you stop living by the question, what do I do next? And instead, rest in a gentler invitation. How is this moment inviting me to stay? You sit with a warm cup of tea and feel yourself healing. You look at the evening sky and realize nothing is missing. You hear birdsong and sense the whole universe whispering through it. Not because life has become perfect, not because you've fully awakened, but because you've stopped waiting for a perfect moment and finally started living in this one. You realize you don't need to know everything. You don't need to reach the highest level of enlightenment. You don't need to become someone special, because everything you thought you needed was only clouding the fullness already within you. You begin to live more lightly, not because you gave up the game, but because you now see. You don't need to win to be free. You are not from outside this world. You come from the deepest layer within it, a place no one ever taught you to look. And now, you have returned. Not through words, but through pure, embodied presence. In the end, truth is not an answer. It doesn't thunder like a prophecy. It doesn't arrive through some grand ritual. It doesn't descend like divine light from the heavens. It simply appears quietly. When you stop searching, you stop trying to understand. Stop analyzing. Stop proving. Stop manipulating life as if it's something that needs fixing. And in that space, truth arises. Without warning, without a name, just a quiet knowing so complete, nothing feels missing. You no longer stand before the world. You merge with it. Not by losing yourself, but by expanding so wide that there are no more edges. You don't reach the end of the journey, because there is no end. You simply touch a deeper layer, and right there is another beginning, and you won't carry much with you. Only a few precious realizations that you've always known, that you are remembering, that you don't need to become someone else to be worthy of life, that life doesn't need fixing. It only needs to be felt more deeply. If something in this video resonated with you, it wasn't because of the words. It was because, maybe, you quietly remembered yourself. And if you wish to go further, hold this frequency. Don't forget it when the screen fades to black. You don't need to do something grand. You only need to stay with the truth rising within you. Feed it with silence, water it with breath, and let it live through your small choices every single day. If you feel ready to go deeper, we are still here. A more profound journey begins in this video. Open that door only when your soul truly says, yes,